Hello, my name is Dr. Jennifer Friedman.
And I'm Dr. Laurel Graham, and we're both faculty at the University of South Florida.
First, some background on the project. From 2013 to 2017, we partnered with a community recreation center in a suburb of our city in order to locate respondents who mostly identified as middle class. Parents of children in the 8 to 15 age range were considered for the project, but only if they saw themselves as a primary food provisioner in the family, the one who plans the meals and cooks. Within the families of those 40 parents who became respondents, 32 were women and 8 were men. We also interviewed 27 tween or young teen children from these families. In this very preliminary research, we focused on the 6 adults and 3 children respondents whose families had immigrated to the mainland in the US from formerly colonized spaces. A unique feature of this project is that over the 4 years of data collection, 21 advanced university students became research partners through their participation in a sociological research experience course. In this course, students were taught how to do qualitative research, and each conducted at least one interview that fit the parameters for inclusion in the study. In a 2017 article, we documented how the racial, ethnic, national, and sexuality diversity of these student partners enriched the grounded theory discussions conducted over the 4 years. As 2 middle-class white US-born mothers with young teen children, this inclusion of diverse student partners enriched our study in unforeseen ways. 8 of our 21 student researchers were children of immigrants. Early in the project, these students sensitized a larger research team to the ways that their family experiences challenged assumptions about how families manage the job of feeding themselves. The television series Fresh Off the Boat was running the same year as we were collecting data. Eddie Wong's Taiwanese American family enacts a dominant narrative. Mothers push ethnic family food on their kids, and their kids resist. Eddie will do everything he can to sit at the cool table at school, and that means not bringing a Chinese lunch. Like Eddie and his brothers, our second-generation immigrant students often remembered rebelling against their family's traditional foods, especially when they were eating among Americans. All this prompted our initial question. This paper addresses the question through a close look at the micro context of family eating. We learned that stereotypes reinforced in the mass media may resonate with some immigrants, but they ultimately fail to paint a realistic picture of how immigrant families craft a unique family food identity by negotiating a balance between foods of the homeland and US food culture.
An interpretive interactionist and constructionist perspective provides a theoretical lens for this study of the micropractices of family food consumption. This means that our own experiences and those of other members of our research team are recognized as integral to our analyses and not something to be isolated from our analyses. Family life is a site for building both individual identity and collective identity, and conflict is inevitable. Immigrant families struggle to assert their understanding of appropriate family-making practices, including appropriate meal times, foods, and eating practices within a context of US culture. The literature on children's socialization has now merged with the sociology of food and eating literature to demonstrate how American junk foods often serve as markers of coolness that earn children's status among peers. A rich literature on American children of immigrants finds that children experience role conflict, identifying with the ethnicities of their parents and with American identities, and Americans in quotes. Older models of acculturation dominated the literature in the past century. As Ong, 2003, has pointed out, what counts as immigration has changed. Migrants today tend to maintain close ties with their families back home using new technologies. The old image of acculturation is therefore outdated. Chapman and Began from 2013 have challenged notions of dietary acculturation and resistance to acculturation as a form of ethnic identity maintenance, instead exploring how food practices may reflect simultaneous ongoing attachments to multiple national identities. They write of their Punjabi immigrant respondents that, quote, participants' food practices reproduced, challenged, and reinvented cultural norms, particularly in gender roles concerning food preparation and the consumption of Punjabi food. Their food practices were products of, as well as tools for, the production of transnational migrant identities. What kinds of effort are involved in navigating the tensions between cultural reproduction of ethnic identity in the family and raising kids who feel like they belong? This is our main research question. We divide our findings into 3 categories.
This is Patricia, and like others in our study, she emphasized the importance of really instilling a sense of ethnic identity through the food that she makes. She works incredibly hard. Not only does she work outside the house, but she pays attention to all details involved with cooking. She emphasizes over and over again that she cooks from scratch. She never opens up a can, and that she only cooks Spanish food, and tries to instill that within her children, the love of Spanish food. And Gabriella, like others within our study, emphasized the importance of rice, and in her case, rice and beans. And others also said that every meal has to have rice as part of that meal. It's not a meal if you don't have rice. And Joseph was one of the only fathers, or the main fathers, and he took over the kitchen. He loved cooking. And as you can see down below, he emphasized that both of his parents were a good cook. He took his children to the island so they could see him chop down a coconut with a machete, so they learned how their dad grew up. And he, as you will see later on, cooks amazing dishes for his 2 children. And Camille, she is a divorced mother, and her husband, ex-husband, I should say, is a chef. And Tomas does spend quite a bit of time with his father, looking at all the meals that he cooks. But for Camille, as much as she struggles to try to cook something else, Spanish food, that's where it's at. And she emphasizes that with her children. And we did get into a conversation about the importance of rice, which you see down below, because her young son, Tomas, does not like rice at all.
And one key thing about Camille is that she doesn't just think rice is important for reproducing the culture of her family, but she thinks it's important for the actual bodies of people from her culture. It's got a physical element to it. Priya is currently a nursing student, and she has 2 children. Excuse me. Finding exactly the right ingredients for cooking can be very, very difficult for Priya. Many of our food provisioners drive a long way to find the foods that they need. Patricia and Camille are just 2 examples who have to find the right store that carries the right ingredient, and sometimes it's not even in stock. So then they have to make do.
Yeah, exactly. They have to kind of be creative and try to recreate what they learned from their homeland growing up, because Camille's another person who learned from her grandmother how to cook.
This leads us to theme 2. And in this theme, we want to talk about how kids do sometimes resist what their parents want to make them. And Tomas is a great example. He does not like rice, as we know, and he complains, and it's embarrassing. that he doesn't like the food of his culture. At least Camille feels that that's the case. He wants a Lunchable. Even at home, kids learn the lexicon of American cool kid eating, and they want to enforce it at home as well. Priya laments the fact that her kids ask for chicken nuggets, but remember their father's American and they get those chicken nuggets from him when he's home alone with them. As kids age, they become more capable of expressing and accessing their preferences. And one really telling example of this occurred in our research discussions when one of our student researchers whose family was from Syria talked about how guilty he felt at age 10 sneaking to a birthday party and eating a pork hot dog, which is forbidden in his Muslim faith. It was exciting, but it was also terrifying, and he's still filled with guilt to this day. Theme 3, how do parents and kids work to resolve this conflict? They sometimes try to change one another, and we'll look at a few different ways that they attempt to resolve the conflict, including changing one another, adding an ethnic twist to American cooking, and taking breaks occasionally on special occasions. Jenny, do you want to?
So Patricia talks about the great length that she goes to buy the right kinds of things. And you can see that initially when we first showed some of the quotes of Patricia, she emphasized how important it was that she gave them ethnic food. And here she tells you that her kids don't even know what macaroni and cheese is. But and one way that she does this is by limiting what she has in her household. And here is Joseph, and I know we talked about Joseph before. And one thing that Joseph tries to do is that he celebrates food. He actually was living in New Jersey for a period of time in an ethnic neighborhood and welcomed all the rich ethnic families around, and they all shared a love of food and their recipes. And here he talks about making pizza with his children and making the dough, and you can see the kind of dishes that he makes. He wants his kids to be excited about their food. And here with Patricia, what she tries to do is, even though she gets or talks about being restrictive with really trying to instill a love of ethnic food, she bends when it comes to dessert, but bends in a way that she makes her sweets with her son, which he loves sweets, but they're ethnic sweets. And there's great detail and attention devoted to this. She doesn't do simple things. They're very hard, what she does, and they have to look a certain way and fit what she learned growing up.
Sometimes parents become amateur psychologists, as Priya does. It looks to us like she's using a kind of reverse psychology to get her kids to initially like the Indian food that she wants to make. And she avoids an argument by actually feeding them by spoon up to age 8. And she did this while we were interviewing her, which was really interesting. Kids manage their parents too, and they might couch it in terms of making something new. Remember that Tomas's father is a chef, and he watches the Food Network, and he's excited about cooking, and he tries to get his mom to make things that she wouldn't normally make, which she may not be skilled in making, and so she tries, as she says.
She actually felt really bad when I was speaking with her about the excitement of her son for something new and her inability to do that. So here you see that she kind of figured out a way to do both, and to use sofrito in everything that she makes new, because that is something she understands and that's a part of her ethnic culture. But then it's kind of something new and different. So she bridges the two, a typical American dish of tuna noodle casserole, but instead she uses sofrito, and her son does love that.
And Priya does something similar where she just minimizes the spices that she would normally put into her Indian food in order to get her American husband and her kids to find it more palatable. A third way that families kind of come to some kind of resolution is they create sort of cheat days or break days from their normal cooking. And a lot of times it's when parents are just so tired that they don't feel like making something truly delicious. spaghetti is good to go in those moments, and sometimes it's the canned ravioli, so it's something convenient and American. Other times it might be a party. So Marcella's son, who decided to call himself Vladimir for our study, talks about how they don't usually have salsa and chips at home unless there's a party or and they have company, and then there's leftovers, and then they'll have them as the leftovers. And Marcella, who's the mother of 11, some of whom are grown, talks about how she never buys candy, but on Halloween her kids go crazy, so they get as much candy as they want at that time. Sometimes kids can manage their parents by telling them how much they love them, or maybe showing distress, and the parents are living in American society, U.S. society, where psychological science should shape what counts as good parenting, and so they want emotionally healthy kids, and mothers in particular are held accountable for helping their kids fit in, and so that's a time when the rules are relaxed.
So many kids. What you see is that, like with Patricia, initially she emphasized the importance of we're Spanish, we're foreigners here, we only eat ethnic food. But in actuality, what you see later on in the interview is that she's really proud of her daughter. And so here she talks about how her daughter really adopts many different ethnic cuisines. And you see this kind of blending that happens that isn't talked necessarily about in the literature. It tends to be pretty monolithic in the literature about the importance of either identifying only with ethnic food or becoming completely acculturated, and the kids only want American food. And here she actually is proud of her daughter for just having a much more eclectic ethnic taste. And her daughter's learning to cook in the traditional ways as well, which also makes her proud. So we have a fairly short discussion. We're looking for help from the audience and ideas, but what we can conclude in our discussion is that clearly the acculturation hypothesis is not applying to these families, that they're not resisting acculturation or succumbing to it either way, that they're creating this innovative new mix. And the idea that they're constantly insisting on only the food of their homeland is an exaggeration. So the initial clip from Fresh Off the Boat is an exaggeration. There are several limitations of the research, as you can see. I mean, a very small sample size, obviously. And we really aren't interested in this particular study about trying to correlate with which country did they come from, how long have they been here. This is too preliminary for that. But probably the biggest limitation is that we don't have longitudinal data, because our hunch, given that we have our student researchers and we have the respondents in the study, is that as kids age and get through their teen years, they may start to embrace some of the food of their homeland, their parents' homelands, a bit more, that they start to become more proud of that. And here, as a tentative conclusion, we sort of wrote that out. But it was really telling to go back to this video clip that's on YouTube from Fresh Off the Boat that we showed you, which had over 4 million views, and see that the very first comment was this. This phase will be over in no time, writes that commenter. And these are some of the references we cited in this paper. We look forward to your comments. Thank you so much. Thank you.